Syrian Arab Republic as concerned country, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
سيد الرئيس، أود بداية أن أسجل شجب وقت
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, I would like to express our condemnation for holding this session in a way that totally contravenes the rules of procedure. This shows a manipulation and politicization of the mandate and the work of our Council, especially that we were not consulted as a concerned state. If the session were being held to discuss the situation of human rights in Syria, then why skip item 4 of our agenda, which will deal in part with the situation of human rights in the Syrian Arab Republic? Or is it that some wish to use the high-level segment to convert it into a session of slander and libel with the only aim of politicizing the questions of human rights? However, if the session of today aims at guaranteeing humanitarian assistance, the Human Rights Council is not the appropriate forum for such matters. And continuing with such violations will be a serious precedent for this Council. And if we believed that the aim of holding this session is care for the situation of the Syrian people, then why work behind the scenes and avoid a direct dialogue with Syria as a concerned state, as was done by the International Committee of the Red Cross? Its joint cooperation with the Syrian Red Crescent and the concerned governmental agencies have led to providing humanitarian assistance to a number of affected areas, in addition to the evacuation of wounded and civilians. These efforts continue to this very moment. We are convinced that the real aim behind holding our session today is to cover up for the violence and murder perpetrated by the armed groups against innocent civilians. This was referred to clearly by the Agence France Presse on the 25th of February, 3 days ago, when it referred to a foreign correspondent inside Homs the following, and I quote, "What is called the Free Syrian Army is preventing the evacuation of the wounded, and the justifications given by this group is mere lies and fabrication, as was declared by the ICRC," end of quote. Madam President, we are not pretending that the human rights situation in Syria is perfect. We are aware that there is a regression in the quality of services that is usually provided by the government to the population of the regions facing violence. This is due to the armed groups that are using residential areas as bases. They are targeting the infrastructure of the state, including facilities and health institutions. The number of hospitals that have been attacked until the 9th of February 2012 is 18 hospitals, in addition to 48 health centers and 129 ambulances. This in addition to the adverse impacts of the unjust and unilateral economic sanctions that have been imposed by some countries on the Syrian people. These have prevented the access of medication, vaccines, food, and fuel in all forms, as well as electricity. It has also impeded transfers to buy these materials. Everybody in the world knows that unilateral economic sanctions are the worst form of violation of human rights because they target first and foremost civilians, children, women, and elderly. And in spite of the above, none of the international organizations, specialized UN agencies, none of them have issued an appeal with regards to what they call the humanitarian situation in Syria. On the contrary, a high-level official in UNHCR reaffirmed a week ago that Syria, which is the third biggest host for refugees in the world, cannot push its population to become refugees. He also reaffirmed that the Syrian authorities allowed UNHCR to provide assistance to Syrians, though the UNHCR teams had always cared especially for Iraqi refugees. He also said that the numbers mentioned are exaggerated and most cases do not come under the definition of refugees. He asked not to exaggerate. We also wish to refer to the fact that none of the special rapporteurs on humanitarian matters have voiced any urgent appeal in this field. Madam Chair, the world has recently seized some serious distorting of the concept of humanitarian intervention and civil protection. Some countries have used these two concepts to obtain blatant military intervention, an attempt to change regimes and destroy the infrastructure of targeted states through aggression, shelling, military incursions, and other means. Madam Chair, we would like to reaffirm the fact that the call for holding this session is part of a pre-established plan. It aims at attacking the Syrian state and its institutions under the pretext of humanitarian needs. The proof is those who called for holding this session have not and will not wait for the report of the Independent Commission of Inquiry. This report does not have any mention of the deterioration of the humanitarian situation. It also recognized openly the painful and negative impacts of economic sanctions on the Syrian people as a whole. Whoever pretends that he is a friend of a people does not impose illegal and harsh economic sanctions on it. Madam President, Syria welcomes any technical assistance that can be provided by the United Nations to Syrian institutions. We reaffirm to those who allege friendship to the Syrian people that the simplest and most successful step that can be taken and immediately to help the Syrian people is to stop inciting and enticing sectarianism, to stop media lies and providing arms, weapons and funds and putting the Syrian people one against the other. We hope that those will have the courage needed to call for a constructive dialogue that will bring together all Syrians and will respond to the needs, ambitions, and aspirations of the Syrian people. I would like to end my statement by quoting Mr. Paulo Benera, the president of the Independent International Commission of Inquiry. He said before WRS Swiss radio a week ago the following, and I quote, "We must stop on continuing to talk of imposing humanitarian corridors in Syria, because this is impossible. Who wants to give humanitarian assistance must negotiate with the Syrian government, as is being done now by the International Committee of the Red Cross." End of quote. Madam President, since the Council is determined to violate its own mandate and rules of procedure, and since it has become a toy in the hands of some countries, and we have seen this in more than one occasion, today being the last of those occasions, and considering that the real aim of holding this session is to fuel the flames of terrorism and to prolong the crisis in my country by expressing a message of support through this session to the armed groups, and considering the fact that the concepts of protection and humanitarian intervention are being manipulated in a flagrant manner for political reasons, my delegation declares its withdrawal from the sterile discussion. We also declare that we do not recognize the legitimacy of the session, nor the legitimacy of any malicious and prejudiced resolutions it may adopt. I thank you.
Is in custody. Now, Doctors Without Borders has recently suspended its mission in Misrata, saying it's treated patients for injuries sustained during interrogation. What do you make of that?
I think Doctors Without Frontiers, like Human Rights Watch, like Amnesty, they can't suddenly feign surprise about what's actually come to pass in Libya, because there's a pattern here emerging, isn't there? That so-called human rights organization, who obviously have a Western-centric, Eurocentric coloration on everything, they seem to provide the quote-unquote human rights justification for certain Western policies of foreign aggression. Then once these countries are destabilized and turn into failed states by the NATO or unilateral Western military aggression, then they suddenly are surprised that they all along have been used, and perhaps are allowing themselves to be used in actually in justifying a human rights so-called foreign intervention, and then feigning surprise. But I think it's interesting what they've said, and it's quite clear what's going on, is that Doctors Without Borders have said very clearly that we are being used by the Libyan rebels to basically make better those detainees that have been tortured, so they can be tortured again. So the torture state which Libya has now developed, which just with Gaddafi's regime pales into was a much better human rights situation by any real standards. Now, Doctors Against Borders are feigning surprise, but frankly, they are being used in this way, and they're allowing themselves to be used. And it's high time, really, that the people across the world see these so-called human rights organizations for what they are, basically the Trojan horses of Western foreign policy. All right, one last question I'm going to toss in here. We only have a few seconds left, but how long do you see it before there is stability and peace in Libya? Is there stability, peace today in Afghanistan? Is there stability and peace today in Iraq? As long as those people who are able to actually maintain some semblance of state stability and human rights, that's the old regime, as long as they're kept out of the current status quo, this will be the situation ongoingly. All right, Sukan Chandon, journalist and Middle East expert, live for us in London. Thanks for that.
I reported yesterday that coalition forces launched more than 110 Tomahawk missiles.
That's the second set of really heavy strikes we've heard. And now what you're hearing is Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar!
إله إلا الله لا لا بس